Hi, everybody, again. Thank you so much for joining us. Another Friday. I'm very excited. And today I'm joined by Igor Tregub. Some of you know him very well. Hi, Igor. Good to see you remotely. Igor is immediate past chair of the San Francisco Bay chapter of the Sierra Club. And he held this position for 3 years. And I have to say, when I took over, I feel like I have very, very big shoes to fill. Igor is also a commissioner on the Berkeley Rent Board, right? And the chair of the, oh my God, I have to rent the zoning adjustment board. Are you still a chair, Igor?
I'm not.
All right. Well, we'll get to it. And Igor is also active with the California Young Democrats, and he is the chair of the Environmental Caucus. Igor, you can correct me if I'm misrepresenting something, because you have so many titles and so many positions that you hold. But what really inspires me about you, and I feel that so many people can learn from you, is that you do a lot, but you do it so well. And I'm always, always, always amazed and inspired that you are active and you follow through on your commitments, and you are very responsive and deliberate. So thank you so much. It's a true inspiration. Because you're a dear friend also, and clear, bright light in my life. So thank you so much. And also, I want to say this is definitely a very good example of Ukrainian and Russian collaborating well, and probably a good example for our respective countries, right? So with that, I actually want to ask you, you were born in the United States from what I know, but your parents and grandparents came from Ukraine. So, and so much of who we are and what we do in life is shaped by our childhood, by our roots, by our parents or people, important people in our lives. So I wanted to ask you, where are you coming from? Who are you? What are your parents? Who are your parents? And what are the biggest influences? Those are a lot of questions in one. So tell us first where you're coming from, where you're born, and where you're raised.
Well, thank you so much, Olga. And I have to say that you are doing an incredible job as chair. You are going to leave much bigger shoes to fill than I ever did. So thank you so much for your leadership. It's an honor to be here on this program. And my background is actually the work that I do now, the things that I believe in, my value system, comes from my lived experience as an immigrant. I was born in Kiev, Ukraine.
Oh, wow.
And
You were born in Ukraine. My goodness.
I was. And at the ripe age of 5, I was plucked away by my family as we started a journey that eventually took us to the United States, across several states here before we finally settled in California. But before that, it took us on a journey through Israel, where I spent 3.5 years, Germany, where I spent another 13 months, Knoxville, Tennessee, the first place that I came through. And when I came to the United States, it was kind of funny, actually. I remember celebrating my 10th birthday in Germany at a McDonald's there, which is hilarious because McDonald's in Europe are totally different, and it was basically a full service restaurant, and they gave me a t-shirt that said "Ich habe mein Geburtstag gefeiert" in McDonald's, which means I have celebrated my birthday in McDonald's. And then literally a week later, I gave away all the toys that I had to the kids in my German 4th grade class and moved to the States. I have a lot of memories of moving around, and there's lots of happy memories of my childhood, but it also took me a while to realize that every time I moved, I had to basically start anew. And when I do my work now, I think about what it must feel like for families that have sometimes lived for generations in a community, what it looks like for them to be uprooted and have to start again. And this is what informs the anti-displacement work in which I'm engaged. I also have deep memories of ultimately making it after being separated from members of my family that I really look up to, my grandparents, my grandfather, who thankfully is still around. He's living in LA. He's in his 90s now, and he is my number one role model for how I try to live my life. And it took a while to reunify our family. To, in my grandfather's case, we had to petition to grant him refugee status after he was attacked. It was an anti-Semitic crime inside his own, the elevator of his own apartment on Veterans Day.
In,
No
in,
less.
in Kiev?
In Kiev, yeah. So it was Veterans Day. He just got a bouquet of flowers after rising up the ranks, which for someone who's Jewish was nearly impossible to do in the Soviet Union. And he achieved the rank of colonel. So he was coming up the elevator to his own apartment, and there was an anti-Semitic hate crime that he suffered. But
So sorry, Igor.
ultimately, we were able to, through the intervention of the staff of former Senator Barbara Boxer, for one, and many others, we were able to bring him here. And what makes me so upset is that the things that we were able to do for uh, essentially to rise up to the middle class here, to achieve some semblance of the American dream. If my skin color was different, if I came from a different country, it's very possible that my life circumstances and my own circumstances would be very different now. So that's what drives, especially after Trump's election, for the last 3.5 years, this drives my work to provide solidarity, my sisters and brothers who are fellow immigrants or descendants of immigrants as well.
Yeah. And you do so much also, Igor. You constantly, I think, within the Sierra Club and everywhere you work, I know that you're bringing up that issue all the time, and I think that should be on people's minds and in consciousness. First of all, I wanted to thank you for talking about your grandparents, and I had the honor to meet your parents and your grandparents, and we spoke Russian, which
That's
was
right.
great. Yes, amazing, very warm people, very curious, and it was a true pleasure. They actually hosted me in LA for one of the Democratic conventions.
I remember that.
I
Small
know.
world.
I know. And thank you so much for that. It was a true, it was a treat really because of course they, they were curious about my life, they shared about their lives, and also they, like Ukrainians and Russians and, Slavic, traditions and, Jewish traditions, they always open up the table and just they want to feed you and they want to make you feel welcomed and nourished. So it was amazing experience. So thank you so much for sharing that. that piece of your life with me. That really was a treat. So I actually want to know a little bit more about your life through all of those moves. So from Tennessee, you came straight to California. Is that? I didn't know all of that about you. You know, we know each other for what? I don't know, 20, 15 years or so.
A
Well,
long time. We go back a minute.
I know, I know. So it's fascinating. So what are the what are the observations that you made, you know, through your travels? So you shared one of them, that you were aware of, that you became aware of, you know, struggles that immigrants and, you know, through moves have, but some other things that sort of stood out for you in Ukraine or Germany or Tennessee. And
Yeah,
maybe, you know, maybe connect, because you are active in environmental movement. What are the things that sort of brought you awareness of environment and nature and the importance of nature and human connection?
that's a great question, Olga. And it took me a long time to be able to have enough self-reflection and look back deeply enough to see what it all meant. But if it wasn't for my formative experience in Europe and Israel, I don't think I would have quite the relationship with the great outdoors as I do now. And started in Ukraine. One of my earliest memories was
Okay.
walking.
Hold on, Igor. I'm so sorry. Hold on just one second. You're freezing for a second. So forgive us, everybody who is watching. It's obviously technology isn't perfect. So I might interrupt Igor once in a while to just have him repeat thing. So
Am I still freezing?
no, you're fine now.
I'm fully thawed. Okay, good.
Yeah.
I was just thinking back to those cold winters in Kiev.
Oof. Mhm.
My one of my earliest formative memories was walking around in a deep lush forest in on the outskirts of Kiev and picking mushrooms and learning all I know now that I haven't forgotten about which mushrooms are edible and which are poisonous.
The
I
age of 5, you memorize all that?
I had a lot of free time on my hands, clearly. Uh, my my family had a dacha, which in Russian is basically it's a summer house, and we would all converge on it every summer. And I also remember walking barefoot along the river bank, and it that's where I first really was able to interact with nature in any meaningful way. From there, we went to Israel, and that's where I first took in the desert and was able to admire the desert and the
The
mountain.
desert, you took the desert on, you interrupted a little bit, Igor, too.
Yeah, I was able to take on the desert and the mountains, the beauty of that kind of environment. It's something that made an indelible
Mm.
impression on me. And then from there, when I moved to Germany, we lived in two places in Germany, but the first place we lived in were um, in the suburbs of Germany, on the outskirts of town. And there was a forest that went on as far as the eyes could see. And I remember just taking walks in the forest as a kid and getting lost in the forest,
And
picking raspberries.
which town? Which town you said?
It was in Ulm, which
Oh,
is the birthplace of Albert Einstein.
oh wow.
Also had, I think, one of the tallest buildings ever constructed for about 300 years, which was the Munster. And I remember.
That's what I love about you, Igor. Every time I talk with you, I learn something fascinating. Thank you. And you were talking about going to the forest and raspberries, right?
Yeah, picking raspberries, sitting, there were these makeshift lookouts. I would climb up those and sit there for hours and read books. And the Germans tend to be very environmentally conscious, and I joined the environmental club in third grade, and I think that was my first formal involvement in the environmental movement. One of the first assignments I was made to do through that club, which I did more than willingly, was to go out to the banks of a river that crossed the city I lived in and count the number of bats, which of course would only come out at night. So it was so interesting to see that transformation of day into night and the bats coming out.
Wow, and they usually come out, I think, in like the one unforgettable impression I have. I saw it in Napa, also at the sunset. They come like a blanket. They were coming from under the roof of one of the old buildings. I've never seen anything like that. They were just coming literally like a dark blanket from under the roof. It was just amazing. I don't know if you saw anything like that, but or if they were coming sort of, but.
Yeah, I don't think I recall seeing anything that dramatic, but that certainly would have left an impression.
That's a fascinating, actually. Igor, hold on just 1 second, because and I'm not sure if this is, you just freeze for seconds on my end, or if that's you know, in the live stream also. So we have also, I don't know if I mentioned, we have our wonderful Virginia, who is the communications manager for San Francisco Bay chapter. She is helping us and being our, you know, angel, watching over us in the background. So I want to make sure that you hear everything that Igor is saying, because I'm missing some of the things. So Virginia, how we, if you can chat, how we doing? Can you sound smooth? Okay, so maybe it's on my end, so we'll just roll with that. Thank you so much, appreciate it. Okay, so Igor, if I re-ask you, I'll try to just, you know, roll with it. All right, thank you. So, you know, going, so many experiences that you shared also, it was so many memories, you know, coming up in my mind. You know, one time I was picking berries, picking raspberries, and I had bees, or yellow jackets, actually sting me right in
no.
because I swam over the river into the forest, and I came across that raspberry grove, and I'm like, oh my God, raspberries. And wild raspberries, if you tasted them, they taste amazing. They have this aroma that is just absolutely no comparison to the grown ones. And
That's cool. Once you taste those, it's hard to go back to anything else.
Exactly. And well, dacha also, I think that everybody who grows their own produce knows that there's just absolutely no comparison to the fragrance and the taste of cucumbers, tomatoes, you know, peppers. Everything you grow yourself is just absolutely. Is that your recollection also?
Yeah, before I knew what all these organic labels meant, I knew that in order to get the best produce, you would not want to go to the grocery store in the Soviet Union. But if you were lucky enough to get some homegrown produce, it was the best.
Yeah. And I'm assuming your grandparents and parents grew some in Russia and dacha, or?
Yeah, I know that I would just I think I had the best of all worlds, because I would come in and it was already fully grown, and I could just pick it off and eat it. But there was a lot of erudite labor that went into it. And now that I think about it, that probably also made one of my erstwhile impressions on just the power of what it looks like to interact with the earth, with Mother Nature in that way, and to grow food using what nature has to offer, and to do it in harmony with nature without any chemicals or things that are not good for us and are not good for the planet either.
Yeah, that's true. Oh my God. So one day I probably will write a book about how my grandmother, I actually garden with my grandmother quite a bit because I grew up in St. Petersburg. We also had dacha, like a lot of a lot of people in the former Soviet Union did, and I did garden with my grandmother. No pesticides, no, you know, everything natural. But a lot of Americans probably will be completely taken aback if I share some of the things we did. I know are very common. One of those days. So fast forward to I mean, you spent in Israel only 13 months, you said? Still about a
That was
year.
Germany. So Israel, I
Oh,
was
in Germany, Israel. Oh, Israel was after Kiev. Sorry, I got mixed up a little bit.
oh,
So
I get mixed up on my comings and goings as a kid all the time.
yeah. Well, it's amazing to me that you have so many memories from your childhood, and you know, I guess that the 5 years is when you already have, you know, 5 years. So do you remember any interesting things from Israel except for desert? That would be a stark difference between Ukraine, I would say.
Yeah, well, one of the memories I remember that was really a testament in my human stupidity, and
Aw.
thankfully this is a story that turned out okay in the end, but there was a lot of construction going on in the certain regions of the Middle East at the time. I think that still continues.
Mhm.
And I was visiting a new settlement somewhere in the center of the country. We were visiting friends, and this was my. It's funny to retell the story now, being on the zoning board and in the safety, including construction safety arena. But this was my first experience with unpermitted work and things being done without any checks. Um, and I probably should have realized that uh, really big sandbox that looked like really awesome sand in which to play. I actually instigated a whole movement. I got all the kids in the neighborhood to jump
I'm
in the sandbox.
surprised.
And it took me a few seconds to realize that it was not sand. It was something that I was just getting familiarized myself with called cement. And I started to sink into it shortly after. Thankfully, I was able to
I'm
get out
sorry.
just in time.
How old were you?
I, let's just say it'll make me feel better that it was, I was younger than 10,
It's, yeah,
maybe
it's
younger
all
than
good.
8.
It's all good. Well, good thing. Did other kids get out in time also?
Yeah, I would feel really bad if that hadn't happened. But I
Okay.
think I also jumped in the deepest, so it took me more time than the other kids to then get out of the deep end.
How far? How deep?
You know, all I remember is
Sorry.
all the clothes I was wearing had to go.
I'm so sorry, Igor. I mean, now of course it sounds like, it sounds fun, but I can imagine for a kid on this age it was probably terrifying. Sorry.
Yeah,
But
you would appreciate this in Russian. I think I said, well, that didn't feel like pesok or sand that I had ever experienced.
wow, oh my God, those childhood stories. And it's like, and then also remembering in St. Petersburg, I was a sort of a tomboy running around with boys and girls who were also inquisitive. And to your point, all construction sites, you could totally get in, into construction site and run around and climb all kinds of things. But now I'm thinking back, I was like, oh my God, good thing we all survived.
What's a safety barricade?
No, well, I mean, even if there was a safety barricade, there was always a hole sneak in. Yeah. Oh, memories. You bring so many memories. But anyway, so how did you talked about the environment and nature, and it's true that I think that in Soviet Union, we were just, wilderness was wilderness. Also, you would step into the forest and there was just a, small trail, no bathrooms, no amenities, nothing. It was just you in the wild forest. On the field, whatever that is. But how did you become interested in housing and being on a rent board? And because you're extremely active, so what was it that spurred that interest and that passion?
Yeah, thank you for the question. So it wasn't until my college years that I became really interested in housing affordability. I was one of many students, maybe the preponderance of students on the UC Berkeley campus, which is not unique to that campus, to be very interested in the issue of affordable rent and eviction protections that worked. But peeling back the onions, which I've had an opportunity to do.
A lot of them, right?
Since
Still a lot of onions.
a lot of onions, a really, really big bloated onion. I I think it was what I started with, where just as we were, my family and I were getting a foothold, we had to move yet again. And for my family, it was most of the time it was in search of a better life, and frankly where the jobs were, which is not unique to a lot of immigrant stories. But it got me to thinking what it looks like for families who have grown up, or multiple generations of the same family having grown up in the same community, and then having to be displaced from that community due to the impacts of gentrification, due to the impacts of a lack of economic opportunity, systemic racial and environmental injustices that have happened, and what it looks like truly to be uprooted from a community where you've grown up and everything you know comes from that community. So as I got increasingly more involved, I started to think about the people that I was serving. Well, obviously, as I got more involved, especially after I first ran for the rent board out of college,
Wow,
I
out of
started hearing more stories like that. And suddenly something clicked, that I was not just doing this work as an advocate for students. I was doing this work as someone who had experienced my own share of displacement in my life. Thankfully, mine came with a happy ending ultimately, but for a lot of folks, it did not. And often the positions that we are in, the roles that we play, it shouldn't be this way, but in our system, which doesn't really have much of a social net, which we have seen time and time again, particularly accentuated by what's happening in the midst of this pandemic and how it disproportionately affects people just based on their skin color and their economic standing in the community. Sometimes the roles that we play, whatever they might be, we might end up being that backstop, the line of last defense, and it makes those roles all the more meaningful because you think about how much of someone's life and their future is wrapped up in a policy that you are trying to promote, defend, or advocate for.
Yeah, well, it's, and you've been a complete, advocate for that. But now I think that's what I hear and what makes it clear for me that you're coming from the personal experience. And I think that's such an important part, because when you internalize that experience, you can come from empathy and not just, advocate sort of, for the lack of a better word, superficially, but you lived it, you understand it. So what I'm also curious, is like, because I had a privilege to get to know you, not get to know your parents and family well, but meet them and have conversations with them. Did you have conversations about that experience of being, having to move so many times, at your dinner table? And you also speak Russian, right? I'm assuming the Russian language was more spoken in your family.
Yeah, totally. And it's interesting. I'm in a program now that's centered around water policy and advocacy, but
Yet another interest.
a big part of the program is writing out our story of self, so that we can then be more effective at writing a narrative of us and a narrative of now, the fierce urgency of now. And it
Are you
didn't.
quoting Eckhart Tolle?
I am. That was not my quote. No, I give credit where it's due. A lot of emotions came out as I started writing these stories, because these were things that were so ensnared in the back of my mind, but didn't really have a release until I started to write these stories and they all started coming out. One of the formative memories I have, though, is when we were leaving the former Soviet Union, when the country finally started letting out larger amounts of Jews than was the case. And I remember as part of that, my family had to pretty much give up everything but the clothes on our backs. We had a couple of suitcases, and that's all that we packed into the train that was going to take us to Moscow and ultimately out of the Soviet Union. And for a 5-year-old kid who had no concept of what this would mean for the rest of my life, all I can remember is seeing my grandfather at the station and tears welling in my eyes, thinking about how he was not coming with us, and I couldn't understand why we can't bring him with us. It was only later that those kinds of things were explained to me in a way that where I was able to make sense of them. But I remember that train taking me on a journey far, far away from everything that I had known for my entire life at that moment. And I think it really drives me to ultimately do the work that I do. I think all of us have these kinds of personal stories, and I hope that for most of us, there are elements of joy in those stories, but there are also elements of loss as well. And the interplay of those two is ultimately what I think inspires all of us to do this work. I would encourage anyone who hasn't really had a chance to do that to, I know times are particularly busy right now, but if you can take a few moments to put down on paper, if you haven't ever done this, your childhood recollections. I was very surprised at what an interesting journey of memories this took me on, and helped me better relate to uh, the present work that I do and the future goals of that work. And I hope that is your experience, or will be your experience as well.
Yeah, wow. And thank you for sharing that, Igor. I think that I just, my own memories, because I, I lived in Russia until I was, 23. So I left as a adult virtually, but that nagging feeling, when you come back and leave somebody behind to come back here, that says sort of that I can totally relate. And it was very powerful, and I'm very happy that your grandfather, A, I'm very sorry about what happened to him, and B, I'm so happy that they were able to come here, and that laws and regulations sorry, I'm getting emotional, but it's true. So just relating to what happened to him, and that it took that atrocious moment to finally trigger the system to be able to bring him in. And obviously, I cannot help it but sort of make parallels between what's going on now with immigrants. And you're absolutely right that we are immigrants, but we are privileged to have white skin. And I agree with you that our our path could have turned completely different if we didn't have that privilege. Sorry, I'm getting really emotional, but it is, something that, when you hear those stories firsthand, I think that how can you not get emotional? And but what inspires me about you also, that you not just internalize and do that deep work, but you also act in the world, and you are bringing this experience and you share. And what also so inspiring, that you're always sharing with other people. You're always thinking of ways how to bring new people into, whether it's Sierra Club or the Young Democrats, or people to meetings and to council meetings or rent board meetings. So I'm always seeing you reaching out and making sure that diversity of our community represented everywhere you go. So I also on emotional level really get that. So and I think that the value that you're talking about, doing that deep reflection and sort of understanding, going into your roots, going to your childhood, doing reflection, I think that's very difficult sometimes work, and sometimes painful, but I think it's extremely necessary. So thank you so much. So tell me a little bit about what are your sort of, what inspires you, what gets you out of bed every day? You have thousands of things to do, but sort of core things that you would like to accomplish, let's say this year, or that really drive you?
Yeah, that's a really great question, Olga.
All my questions are great, right?
They're all great. Absolutely.
Thank you, Igor. You were very kind.
um, I, I think lately, to be completely honest with you,
Always.
it's been
Always honest with me.
yeah. I used to think, I was hoping actually 2020 would be the year that I can get out of bed and I'm driven by a singular purpose. And I do have projects that some are personal, some are political, and most of them are a combination of the two where they're really in the service of a broader community. Lately, I've been finding that I'm engaged in a lot of triage, and everyone who works in an agency, like a public agency, whether it's in an elected or an appointed role, is having to deal with some extremely difficult choices due to forces that are in some ways outside of our collective control. So I have been getting a lot of constituent calls. I continue to try to shape policy in a direction that would help give folks a modicum of protections around whether the issue is anti-displacement and eviction protections, or whether the issue is paid sick leave, or all the countless interrelated issues there are, and how the social net that we have can continue to serve folks at a time when it's needed the most. So that's probably in over the last 2 months what has been driving me. But when we get through this crisis, I do
I like
have
the when. I like the when.
when
That's the key, right?
we are going to get through this, and I'm so inspired by talking to folks like you and so many. I mean, I spend probably at least 40 hours a week on Zoom right now, and I
Thank
don't think
you.
it's unique to me at all. But what makes it bearable is, and what makes it more than bearable, it actually inspires me and also drives me, is talking to the people on it who are all have really creative ideas and have sprung into action in so many different ways. So that inspires me as well. I I'm human. I do have my good days and bad days. When I have days when I feel overwhelmed by the enormity of it all, and I want to just um, dig myself into a corner, or just stay in bed. I think on all the folks in my own community, as well as folks on screen that ironically I now interact with more from all parts of the country and world than I ever did. Um, and I'm reminded that I can't stay in bed. It's okay to not be okay. It's very important to practice self-care. But at some point, I owe it to not just the people I serve, but the people in which I'm interconnected in doing this kind of relational work. I owe it to them to stay strong, get out of bed, and get on with the day.
With that said, Igor, and I agree. I think the inspiration plays a huge role in moving forward. And I think I don't want to brush through, and I come off also as a, hopefully as a sort of cheerful, but I want to say that doesn't come without work, internal work. I think that, and I hope you can resonate with that, Igor, and I think that's what you were talking about also, that finding right now, especially right now, I think it's always true, but especially now, what is dear and near to your heart, who can you help, and people is like, well, maybe I can't help anybody. No, you always can help somebody. And I'm, lately I'm thinking that if I'm going through this, there's a chance that at least a certain percentage of population is going through the same grief, pain, sadness, whatever that is, in the same exact moment. So I'm usually like, well, who can I call right now? Who can I call to sort of uplift each other, or what can I do to help? And I think that's such an important thing that you bring up, Igor, that I think that also sort of triggers me. As like some days I also like, I don't want to stay in bed per se, but I was like, oh, I want to sort of just, watch my American Idol or something. but thinking about, oh my God, there's a family that I can help, there are my friends that I can help, there are broader community that I can help right now, and how can I contribute? That really drives me. So thank you so much for bringing that up, and I think that is important. You've been my inspiration, and I think that it's important to surround your people deliberately. What they say, you're sum of 5 people that you communicate the most, and I think that's absolutely true. That surround yourself with people who are drivers of goodness in this world. So anyway, I went on a tangent. Thank you for allowing me that, but you brought a lot of reflection.
No, you drive me and inspire me as well, Olga. One of the quotes that left an indelible impression on me in the last few weeks is from someone who is my Shiro, Latifa Simon, who some of you who are watching this know is the president of the BART board right now, and is just an amazing movement builder. And we invited her as a guest speaker for an institute that I'm helping run. One of the things she said that I will never forget is, the cavalry is not coming. So we are the cavalry. We have to rely on one another in this moment. And to the extent that, because things are going to get better, they're going to get better as a sum total of our collective actions right now on a broader community basis, which can sound very daunting, but it's just what you said, Olga. It's the 5 people that you interact with most closely. And I would, honestly, I know we've been talking about work and what can be done in this moment, but it's so important, at least for me, and I think for everyone, is to also have calls with folks who are friends or family members where you can commiserate and talk about what needs to happen in this moment, but you can also just check in on a personal level. And those calls have also been a way to remind me that whether it's a neighbor that I'm calling to check in, whether it's a friend who's living in DC, on a very human level, no one knows quite the answer, but we don't have the luxury to figure it out, or we don't have the luxury to spend a lot of time figuring it out. We have to make some choices in the moment and take some actions. And talking about things outside of work and exercising self-care whatever it is for each individual. For me, it's running right now and doing writing. But whatever, relearning how to play the guitar I stowed away in my closet for decades. Whatever it is that also helps get you a deeper focus on the work, it is important because the community needs you, it needs us, but we can't take care of the community unless we first start by taking care of ourselves.
I'm so happy you're saying that, because I think that's so many more people waking up to that lately, that, you know, before you fill your own sort of soul and cup and take care of your own health and well-being, I think it's very difficult to give to the community at the level that I know you and I and many people want to give. You know, I think it's important also to sort of, I see a lot of activists who are so drained and so, you know, become angry, really. And I think that's, you know, sometimes it's okay to be angry, and sometimes it's okay to express strong emotions as long as they don't consume you. So I think it's extremely important when you're doing, especially work with, you know, difficult work with communities that really need, it's extremely important to have your niche, your friends, your nourishment. So I want to hear you playing guitar. Damn, I should have asked you to bring the guitar to the table so you can play a little bit. And last Sunday, I was like, oh, it's a marathon on my calendar that Igor and I were supposed to run a half marathon together as a fundraiser for the Sierra Club and with other.
That's cool. How's your training coming along?
Me, well, you know what? I'm not running too much, but I am doing my, you know, my yoga and my, you know, meditation routine every morning. And I also, you know, we're blessed. We live in California, so I am also counting my blessings. We have very steep hills here, so I'm taking, you know, we were on a call with Igor last night, and guess what I was doing? I was climbing the stairs and walking. So I also find that combining, you know, being on a call with some physical activity, for me personally, that actually works very well. I
think that's so important. Yesterday, before we were on that call together, I took a call on a budget issue, and it was a really difficult conversations because, like I said, every public agency has to make some very hard choices, and I am so grateful that I was able to take that call while on a walk. Of course, I would not advocate walking outside if you're in a high-risk population. Of course, I encourage everyone when they do walk to take precautions and wear masks. It is the law right now. It is a county-wide order. But I also feel blessed for the ability to at least try to take there's some difficult calls that one has to take on a regular basis, and to be able to do it, not always in the great outdoors, but at least in your neighborhood, has been therapeutic at best, or at least it's easier to take in some of the hard news and have the mental and moral clarity to keep going and figure out some solutions.
Yes, thank you. You know what, I'm wondering, what is next for you? Where you kind of, I mean, I know that it's very difficult time right now to sort of project further than maybe a few days at a time, but what do you envision? What do you want to, you know, I was thinking, it's like during those crises, I want to come out in this way. So what is sort of the purposes, and what are the things that you want to come out of this with, maybe some lessons?
Yeah, on a personal level, the things that I have advocated for years, which it's in the Bay Area, maybe not so much, maybe on the progressive side, but as I travel the country, sometimes that have been seen as wildly radical and, get out of here, Igor. That could never be possible here. But I think we'll realize like what sounded radical 8 weeks ago now just sounds like good common sense middle of the road policy. I do feel the fierce urgency of now. I do. I I think as tragic as it is to say, more people are going to die if we don't do something very quickly and urgently around this. I've been trying to figure out how to make the language of this crisis um, accessible when also talking about its relationship to the climate crisis. And on a surface level, it's easy to say that that's a very tone deaf comparison, or it's so convenient to now talk about this other existential threat that has always been there. But I really believe that this pandemic has laid bare um, the kind of disparities that have always been there. But now it's just easier when everyone is experiencing the pain, the loss, but some are experiencing it much more deeply, simply because of their life circumstances and sometimes just the color of their skin. I think this is the time to talk about.
Yeah, because their basic needs are not met. So
Exactly.
also that. Mhm.
Yeah. So
Sorry.
I think this is exactly the time to be talking about a Green New Deal and not just talking about it, but um, making bold moves to help enact it nationally, statewide, and locally. So I've been spending some time thinking
Yeah.
about as we emerge out of this current situation, how we can uh, create the right set of technological achievements and policy interventions, because those two do need to go together, and how to make them accessible to everyone, and how to make sure that the process of coming up with it in and of itself is accessible. How do we move into a world that truly is one in which those frontline communities that have been most impacted by both crises um, have an opportunity to lead, have access to the institutions that allow them to lead in this way, because we're not going to get out of this in a healthy or productive way unless we hear their wisdom as well. So that's what I'm thinking about. I have a few projects that I started to work on, but it really boils down to how do we act in this moment in a way that is able to save humanity and is simultaneously able to save the planet.
Thank you, Igor, for that. And I know that, I mean, there's so much to ask of you. You have such a huge and, robust and deep history, and what you involved in is also is like we could go for hours. I feel like we're coming to the this conversation. I hope there will be many more. And I just want to highlight that my experience of you're very deliberate and very thoughtful, and how you treat people, I think is with a lot of compassion, a lot of patience. And I think it's deliberate because, we've been friends for years now. So I know that you really step back and don't react in the moment, but really come from, you know, how can I improve somebody's life? How can I be mentor, coach, whatever that is in the moment, and not, even if they're going through some tough moment or they are consumed with emotion, you always sort of, I see you as that stable presence. You always take a breath, and you always sort of come from kindness, compassion, patience, from good intentions. You able to recognize that even if a person is consumed with emotion, that's not who they are. That you see the pain and you see where they're coming from, and you be able to speak to that. So I really appreciate you for that. Very quick, if something that you would have wanted to share with everybody and I didn't happen to ask that, so maybe you want to share something in a 1 minute, very briefly.
Oh, that's a hard one. Oh,
You don't have to. I mean, I think you covered a lot of territory, so.
I think a fun fact that sometimes I do in a truth or dare environment, and most people don't get this or don't guess correctly the first time around, is I twice had the opportunity to go on Hollywood, and the first time I turned it down to try to graduate from college in the midst of the last recession that we were in. And the next year I turned it down to pursue public service within the federal and local government.
Wow. Well, you're starting that conversation at the on the hour. I want to know more. Well, to be continued. I want to know why you why were you invited to Hollywood, but I want to be respectful of your time and the time of everybody else who is tuning in. Thank you so much again. I hope you derive big value from those conversations, because I truly want to bring people to those conversations who are movers and shakers, who are influencing the community, influencing our lives. So Igor, thank you so much. You're an inspiration, and appreciate you and appreciate everybody who is listening and doing your part in creating a better world for all of us. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Olga. Appreciate you. And thank you for Virginia for the amazing tech support.
Yes, thank you so much, Virginia. Yes, amazing staff we